Hello, this is a small video about how the cardiac cycle works. This is an image I've taken from Guyton and Hall's physiology textbook, and I'm going to be using it today to go through how the cardiac cycle works. This is a very complicated looking diagram, but hopefully if we break it down, it will all make sense. So to start with, we're going to mention a few terms. We've got this one here, systole and diastole. Now I know this is probably common knowledge to a lot of you, but systole refers to the ventricular contraction. Diastole refers to the ventricular relaxation. It doesn't refer to how the atria work. So when I say atrial contraction, that means it's happening during diastole, ventricular diastole. If I say atrial relaxation, it happens during ventricular systole, and vice versa. Another point to mention is the valves that we're talking about in this diagram. It's the AV valve, or the atrioventricular valve, and the aortic valve. So we're following the left-hand side of the heart during this diagram, which means if you want to, the AV valve in this would be the mitral valve or the bicuspid valve. Of course, this whole image would work for the left-hand side of the heart, the right-hand side of the heart as well, but this isn't, the pressures here wouldn't be the same as what they're showing here, so it's we're literally looking at the left-hand side of the heart only in this image. And last thing to point out before we get started is that we have to remember that fluid will only move from an area of high pressure to an area of low pressure. So the valves will only open when the pressure from one side of the valve is bigger than the pressure on the other side of the valve, and the valves will close when the pressure on one side of the valve is smaller than the pressure on the other side of the valve. This will make sense as we go through, but I just wanted to mention that that's how fluid moves. Okay, so as we start, we're going to start by looking at this red line, pretty much the red line by itself here. So we start at the beginning, during diastole. We have this red line, it's just plodding along, not too much pressure, and then there's a small bump right at the end of ventricular diastole. That's talking about atrial contraction. So the atria contracts and pumps the last sort of 20 to 30% of blood into the ventricles just before the ventricles contract. So you're filling your ventricles up nicely before you pump it out to the rest of the body. At this point, we're going to talk. This is where the calcium influx goes into the cell and starts that sliding filament with the actin and myosin filaments. And as the pressure increases, it increases above the pressure that's within the atria, and because it increases above that, the AV valve closes. The mitral valve will close at that point. Pressure increases, but we've got the AV valve that's closed, and we're yet to overcome the pressure in the aorta. So what we've got is a contraction is occurring, but there's no change in the volume of the ventricle because the two valves, the inlet and the outlet, are closed, which means we get a little thing called isovolumetric contraction. It means the same volume is occurring during contraction. And this continues until the pressure inside the ventricles overcomes the pressure inside the aorta. Once it does that, the aortic valve will open and blood can then shoot into the aorta and fill the aorta, sending blood to the rest of the body. It does that, contraction continues to occur, continues all the way up to this point here. At that point, it starts to move the calcium ions from the actin-myosin filaments back into the sarcoplasmic reticulum and back to outside the cell. So basically, the cell starts to relax. As it relaxes, the pressure decreases, but still it's above the level of the aorta, so that's okay. Then it gets to the level of the pressure within the aorta is above that of the ventricle. So the aortic valve closes. This stops blood going from the aorta back into the ventricle. So now we're relaxing with the aortic valve closed, and we're yet to open the atrioventricular valve or the mitral valve. So as we relax, the amount of blood within the ventricle stays the same because there's no way in and there's no way out, but the pressure is decreasing. So we get something called isovolumetric relaxation, or the same volume during relaxation. So as it relaxes and relaxes down, eventually the pressure inside the atria is bigger than the pressure inside the ventricles. That opens the atrioventricular valve, and blood can begin to flow back into the ventricles from the atria, and then we start again. So this is also, if you follow the blue line, this also works out. So like I said, starts out with about 110 mils in the ventricle, slight bump from where the atria contracts and adds up to 130. Then, during the isovolumetric contraction, the volume stays exactly the same. It's contracting, but there's no way in and there's no way out, so the volume stays the same. Eventually, the aortic valve opens, all the blood comes out of the ventricle and into the aorta. Then it starts to relax, the aortic pressure overcomes that of the ventricle, the aortic valve shuts, and the AV valve is yet to open, so you've got isovolumetric relaxation. You see the volume stays the same, straight line here. So the volume has stayed the same as the ventricle relaxes, and then eventually the atrial pressure overcomes that of the ventricle, and now blood can start flowing into the ventricle from the atria, and the pressure builds up. This also links in with the PQRST from the ECG, but we're not going to go into that in this section. And also there's heart sounds that occur as the turbulent blood flow hits the closed valves. So it occurs obviously during when the valves shut, which are here and here, here and here. There's a third heart sound as well in some people, but I'm not going to talk about that during this section. So that was my quick understanding of the cardiac cycle. Yeah, thank you.